I'm Lauren Myers, Associate Editor of Monograph Matters for the Society for Research in Child Development. Today, I'll be talking to Dana Townsend and Mark Cummings, authors of a recent issue of the Monographs for the Society for Research in Child Development. Their co-authors are Laura Taylor, Christine Marylees, Andrea Fury, Marcy Goki-Mori, and Peter Sherlow. The work is titled Youth in Northern Ireland, Linking Violence Exposure, Emotional Insecurity, and the Political Macrosystem. You can visit monographmatters.srcd.org for videos, commentaries, teaching materials, and additional content related to this work. Dana, can you describe some of your key findings in this study?
Sure. So one of the things that we know from previous research that has been published in this program is that when youth are exposed to violence in their community, particularly violence that has a sectarian motivation, they're more likely to experience adjustment problems. So they're more likely to have internalizing behaviors and externalizing behaviors. And we found through research that emotional insecurity is the pathway that's the mediator in this process. So it helps explain that. So being exposed to violence tends to make youth more emotionally insecure about their communities, and then in turn, they're more likely to develop adverse symptoms. So this is something we found over and over again. And in this study, we found that this can change potentially based on what is happening in the political macrosystem. So one of the major findings that we found was that when the macrosystem is particularly threatening, that there were differences between Catholics and Protestants.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us if there were any unexpected findings that you didn't anticipate?
Yes, there were actually. So one of them, when we were looking at the full sample of participants in the study, we found that exposure, that relation that I mentioned earlier, that exposure to sectarian violence in the community results in higher levels of emotional insecurity, that relation was actually weaker during periods of high political tension. So that was unexpected. We had hypothesized that it would be stronger when the macrosystem is particularly tense between groups. But we found the opposite finding, and it was interesting, and we're not sure why that is. And I think before any definitive statements could be made, more research would be needed.
Turning to Mark now, could you tell us your thoughts about how you think this study contributes to the broader field of political violence and children?
I think this study really brings together the overall pattern of studies that we've done in Northern Ireland by adding a rigorous assessment of the role of the macrosystem and accounting for the impact of political violence on children. So I think it helps bring this study together, but also helps, I think, advance the model for the broader field, try to conceptualize it and empirically assess the macrosystem, which has been a salient question for many years and really raised by his original model, one that had not been satisfactorily advanced in the past. So I think this is the contribution here that it kind of pulls it all together, and we can see in terms of the actual monograph we do sort of highlight the various different directions of research, the broader study, and how this study then brings together the study of the different levels of the social ecology and impact on children, which had not been previously done. And this is a question that the role of the macrosystem one that comes up many times over the years at meetings. People have asked, how do we do this? And they've grappled with it. So I think this is a really satisfactory direction. It took us many years. As you can see, we assessed the macrosystem every single day for 6 years. And there's literally thousands and thousands of newspaper articles that were randomly selected and assessed. So it was a long commitment, but Dana really came in and brought it all together.
Turning again to Dana, on the topic of contributions in a broader sense, how do you think macrosystem research is relevant to some of the contexts that we're currently facing, For instance, we're in a global pandemic, there's increasing political division, there's increasing awareness of racial injustice. Do you have any thoughts on how your research could help us understand some of those current challenges?
Sure. I think the methods in this study in particular could be useful for researching any number of other contexts. I think incorporating macrosystem research in general is relevant for a lot of researchers, but especially for anyone studying contexts where there's a lot of political turmoil and division, you know, things like group narratives or ideology norms in a lot of places. I would say, particularly the US context right now, these kind of factors can be salient enough that they influence child development potentially, or even have the possibility to redirect and to guide individual behavior in really powerful ways. So I think the examples that you gave are excellent examples. You know, there's so much political division right now, and the spike in conversations surrounding racial injustice, I think it has had an emotional impact on a lot of people, sometimes in profound ways. And for many people, you know, COVID aside, I know everyone's day-to-day life most people's day-to-day life has changed because of COVID-19. But with that aside, just looking at the political division and conversations about racial injustice, a lot of people, their day-to-day life, you know, may be the same. They may not be directly impacted by it, but just that political climate shift can have a really profound impact on people's well-being. So absolutely, I think that macrosystem research has a lot to say about what's going on right now.
Interesting. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Mark, did you have anything to add?
One thing I could add is that while there's problems of political violence and impacts on children worldwide in many different countries, many different contexts, UN recently estimated, I think, over 1 billion children were affected by such contexts. Every context is somewhat different. It's important to take into account the broader context and understanding the relationship between political violence and child development. And the macrosystem, I think, is a key element for bringing in the cultural aspect and the differences across society aspect of the impact of political violence on children.
Great. Thank you both for talking with me today about your work. Is there anything else that you want to say about your work or highlight about your work's contribution that I haven't already asked you?
I think a key element towards effective intervention is to have an empirical basis for intervention, to have findings about the key predictors, mediators, and moderators of outcomes. And this type of empirical basis then provides, through the concept of translational research, a strong foundation for effective intervention. So interventions are based upon solid empirical foundation for what factors affect children and how they interrelate in the process that mediate impact. So this kind of research was process-oriented, looking at multiple aspects of context and process that affect children, provided potentially a strong foundation for intervention in Northern Ireland, but also potentially other areas of political violence and armed conflict in children. But again, in every context, one will need to adapt your intervention approach to the context. So these findings can provide bases for translating empirical findings into intervention, but you'd also need to work closely with people in the communities involved, in the countries involved, to contextualize your approach.
Great. Hopefully some researchers listening right now will be inspired by your comments and will take some action on some of those really interesting ideas.
Thank you for having us. It was great to have this conversation.
Thank you to Dana Townsend and Mark Cummings for joining me today to talk about their work. As a reminder, the work is titled Youth in Northern Ireland, Linking Violence Exposure, Emotional Insecurity, and the Political Macrosystem. You can visit monographmatters.srcd.org for videos, commentaries, teaching materials, and additional content related to this work. Thank you.